Hi, my name is Ryan Richards, and I'm presenting on Inequitable Giving, how philanthropy underinvests in minority groups, and what we can do about it. There's something beautiful about philanthropy. This year alone, more than $350 billion, roughly 2% of the U.S.'s GDP, is going to be gifted to address the U.S.'s most pressing problems. It's an expression of our human ideals at their best, the desire to promote the welfare of others. But despite our best intentions, philanthropy has a problem. It underinvests in minority groups. Racial and ethnic minorities, women and girls, people with disabilities, and LGBT people. The evidence suggests that they benefit from philanthropy less than their mainstream counterparts. Steve Gunderson, the former president and CEO of the Council on Foundations, once said that foundations do not adequately serve minorities on a percentage basis. Research by the D5 Coalition using Foundation Center data indicates that while ethnic and racial minorities compose 37% of the U.S. population, organizations that serve minorities receive a mere 10% of philanthropic investment. And this undermines philanthropy's impact. By not equitably investing in minorities, philanthropy is leaving unsupported some of society's most vulnerable populations. At its worst, philanthropy is actually perpetuating the social inequities that it seeks to correct. Philanthropy cannot realize its ambition to build a more just and equitable society without addressing this problem. So why does this problem happen? How is it that despite our best efforts and intentions, philanthropy underinvests in minorities? The root lies in who controls the resources. By looking at who directs philanthropic resources, we find an unbroken chain of preference towards non-minority members. And this extends from inequality in society at large to the donors and the foundation staff and the nonprofit leaders. It's a picture of minorities marginalized from positions of philanthropic decision-making and benefit. The first link in the chain is who gives. People are charitable at all levels of society, gifting an average of between 2.5% and 5.9% of their annual incomes. But while the charitable impulse is somewhat evenly distributed across social classes, giving capacity certainly is not. The 5% gift of someone with an annual income of $10 million is 1,000 times larger than the 5% gift of someone with an annual income of $10,000. The obvious result is that upper-class members of society hold a disproportionate sway over where philanthropic dollars are donated. This is particularly problematic as minority groups in the U.S. are disproportionately poor. For example, according to the Pew Research study, Black households have an average of 1/13 the wealth of white households, and Hispanic households have an average of 1/10 the wealth of their white counterparts. All of this means that the people directing the bulk of philanthropic dollars tend to be non-minorities. Decision makers at foundations tend to be non-minorities as well. For example, while people of color make up 30% of the overall working population, only 16% of board member seats and 8% of CEO executive director positions are held by people of color. The same trend can be seen in the organizations receiving philanthropic funding. Despite being 30% of the workforce, people of color only hold 17% of nonprofit board positions and 18% of executive director positions. So we have a situation where a relatively small population of upper-class, mostly white, mostly straight, mostly able-bodied, and mostly male individuals are commanding the majority of philanthropic dollars in America. And the result of this is a systematic underinvestment in minorities. So what can we do about this? First of all, we need to clarify our vision of success. What we need is more diversity, inclusion, and equity. If we increase the diversity of who is in the room, and we make sure that diverse voices get heard and have power, then we're going to get greater equity in terms of who benefits from philanthropic giving. Here are 4 leverage points for greater diversity, inclusion, and equity in philanthropy, starting broadly, then honing into where we have the greatest influence. Number 1 is to address inequality. The most obvious answer is also perhaps the most difficult to implement. We need to work for a more equitable world. If we can have a more equitable sharing of power and resources at the societal level, those changes are going to be reflected in philanthropic activity as well. Number 2 is to legislate reform. In the 2000s, a public policy organization in California called the Greenlining Institute generated significant momentum in the California legislature around Assembly Bill 624, a bill that would have required foundations to disclose racial and gender compositions of their board and staff, amongst other things. This was a really threatening proposition to the philanthropic world, and in order to neutralize this threat of external regulation, a coalition of big foundations took it upon themselves to implement meaningful internal regulatory measures. A similar strategy of legislative pressure could likely be repeated in the future. The third leverage point is to become a champion for diversity, inclusion, and equity. And this is specifically for those working in philanthropy. A lot of your work as a champion of diversity in your workplace will be around helping your colleagues move from a minimization of difference orientation to an acceptance of difference orientation. In minimization, your colleagues are going to be very attuned to the shared humanity that all people have, but are going to be fairly blind to the ways that differences shape people's lives. Moving to an acceptance of difference is about helping colleagues become aware of the fact that different communities have different sets of experiences and different access to power and privilege, and that these things matter. So by sparking conversations around how difference matters, you can help move your organization forward. There are excellent resources that have been curated by the D5 Coalition on everything ranging from increasing equity within your giving to how to get more diversity on your board. And then also a good intercultural trainer will be able to help your organization assess its current strengths and weaknesses, as well as identify a pathway that's going to move it forward towards greater diversity, inclusion, and equity. The fourth leverage point is to continue the inner work. It begins with each of us as individuals doing the inner work to deepen our cultural self-awareness of the ways that issues such as race and class, power and privilege influence our own lives and our own experiences, and to deepen our awareness of differences in others so that we can better comprehend how these different issues affect their lives. Similar with being a champion, the D5 Coalition has excellent resources for your inner journey of your relationship with diversity, inclusion, and equity. Likewise, a good intercultural trainer is going to be able to help you identify leverage points for growth and support you in advancing along your own trajectory. Philanthropy is a powerful force in the world, and right now it isn't living up to its potential. There's work to be done, as individuals, as champions within our organizations, at the policy level, and within our society as a whole. And if we're successful at this, we're going to have more diverse perspectives at the table, greater effectiveness with our giving, greater opportunities for our constituencies, and overall be better able to advance the common good.